Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving deep today into a figure whose stories, Headless Horseman, Rip Van Winkle, they're just absolute cultural bedrock.
They really are.
Yet the man himself, Washington Irving, his entire prolific and frankly globally influential career is often just boiled down to those two ghost stories.
And that's the real paradox we're getting into. America's first literary superstar
Yeah.
who, spent nearly 2 decades living abroad. It doesn't quite add up on the surface.
Exactly. Our listeners shared a ton of sources covering Irving's entire journey, and it is a journey. It goes from these satirical pseudonyms and early New York fame all the way to international diplomacy in a very volatile Spain.
And then to his later life as a serious, multi-volume historian and biographer. It's an incredible arc.
So our mission here is to distill why Washington Irving, born in 1783, died in 1859, is rightly considered the first true American man of letters.
Right.
And crucially, to uncover the massive, often invisible cultural fingerprints he left on this young nation. We're talking about things we just completely take for granted today.
What's so fascinating here is just how foundational Irving was. He wasn't simply a storyteller. He was a diplomat, a political commentator, a businessman.
He wore a lot of hats.
So many.
Mm-hmm.
And he fundamentally shifted how America viewed writing itself. He made it a viable, professional career path for the very first time.
That's a huge deal.
A huge deal. He literally invented the blueprint for the American Christmas celebration. He gave New York City its most famous nickname, and he pioneered the whole battle for authors' rights against piracy.
Wow.
Yeah. His career is like a living timeline of the challenges the early American Republic faced, trying to figure out its own cultural identity.
Okay, so we have to start at the beginning, his birth. Because the timing is just so poetically perfect for a national literary figure. He was born in Manhattan on April 3rd, 1783.
That date is absolutely crucial. You couldn't write it better. His birth coincided precisely with the news reaching New York that the British ceasefire had officially ended the American Revolution.
So he's quite literally born with the nation.
Exactly. A symbolic child of the new republic, emerging from the chaos of war.
And his name obviously reflects that symbolic weight. His mother named him after the country's hero, George Washington.
And the connection didn't just end there. It gets better. Irving actually met his namesake when he was just 6 years old.
No way.
Yes, just before Washington's inauguration as the first president in 1789. The story goes that he was brought into the presence of the president, who then placed his hand on the young boy's head and blessed him.
That's incredible. It's like something out of a myth itself.
It is. And it was such a profound moment for Irving that he later commissioned a watercolor painting of that very encounter. That painting held a place of honor in his home, Sunnyside, for the rest of his life.
It's hard to imagine a more potent mythological start for the writer who would go on to define American mythology.
Right.
His family life, though, was pretty comfortable. They were Manhattan merchants, successful enough to support his, let's call it an unconventional path.
And that financial cushion was instrumental. His brothers, who were successful merchants, they often supported his literary pursuits.
So he had a safety net.
A huge one. In those early days, writing just wasn't a reliable profession. So that family backing gave him the freedom to pursue the craft without, the immediate need for a stable job.
That's a critical point. He only became the first professional American writer because he had that early non-professional support.
Exactly. And it's a good thing he had that freedom because he was not cut out for the traditional path.
Not at all.
He described himself as an uninterested student. By the time he was 14, he was already neglecting his schoolwork. He preferred adventure stories and theatrical drama.
Sneaking out to the theater.
Yeah, he'd regularly sneak out of class and cross the East River to attend the theater in the evenings. He was just captivated by spectacle and narrative long before he developed the discipline to actually create it himself.
And this search for atmosphere and, I guess, for material, it led him geographically up the Hudson River Valley.
Right, and that set the stage for his most famous works.
How did that happen?
Well, in 1798, there was a severe yellow fever outbreak in Manhattan. So he was sent upriver for safety. He stayed with his friend James Kirk Paulding in Tarrytown, New York.
The future Sleepy Hollow.
That's the place. And that region was just this deep reservoir of early American history and folklore. He got deeply immersed in the region's Dutch customs and local ghost stories.
He must have found the atmosphere electric.
Totally. The Catskill Mountains, which of course became the setting for Rip Van Winkle, they left this lasting, powerful impression on him. He later wrote that the area had the most witching effect on his boyish imagination.
So that landscape wasn't just a place for him, it was a character.
It was a stage for the young nation's first enduring literary myths. And that atmosphere, it fueled his first foray into publishing. At just 19, in 1802, he started publishing these observational letters on New York society in the Morning Chronicle.
And he immediately used a pseudonym.
He did. He leaned right into that trick, publishing under the name Jonathan Oldstyle. And the name itself was a comment on his somewhat conservative Federalist leanings.
Suggesting he preferred the old ways.
Exactly. And this quickly brought him some early fame and attention from the city's elite.
Even major political figures took notice.
Oh, absolutely. The powerful politician Aaron Burr noticed his sharp wit and was so impressed he sent clippings to his own daughter.
Wow.
And Charles Brockden Brown, who's often called the father of the American novel, he made a trip to New York specifically trying to track down and recruit this mysterious Oldstyle for a literary magazine he was editing.
So Irving was establishing this reputation as a sophisticated wit long before he was even a committed author.
Right. But the pressure to conform was still there. His brothers, they were concerned about his health, so they financed a grand European tour for him between 1804 and 1806.
The classic gentleman's education.
Supposedly. But he largely dodged those expectations. His brother William was dismayed. He wrote home that Washington was galloping through Italy, leaving Florence on your left and Venice on your right.
So he was skipping the essential sites.
He was. Instead, Irving was honing his incredible social, conversational, and diplomatic skills, the very assets that would make him so invaluable later on.
That adaptability is key. He came back home and at least tried to follow a legal career path.
He tried. He studied law with Judge Josiah Ogden Hoffman, but he was just a terrible student. He barely passed the bar exam in 1806, and he freely admitted his lack of dedication.
So this inability to conform to a conventional profession really became the driver for his writing.
It did. He was searching for a path that matched his genuine talent for observation and wit.
Which brings us to his true creative breakout. He co-founds the literary magazine Salmagundi with his brother William and James Kirkpauding in 1807.
Salmagundi was basically an irreverent mirror held up to New York society. It was a platform where he just fully embraced satire, lampooning the culture and politics of the city.
Using a bunch of new pseudonyms, like William Wizard and Launcelot Langstaff.
Right. The goal was pure, witty commentary and entertainment.
And it was here, in this short-lived magazine, that he gave New York City an identity that has lasted for 2 centuries. It was in the 17th issue of Salmagundi, dated November 11, 1807, that Irving gave the city its famous nickname, Gotham.
The irony in this choice is just fantastic. Gotham is an Anglo-Saxon word that literally means goat's town.
Right, it referred to an old English town known in folklore for its foolish inhabitants.
Who deliberately acted mad to prevent the king from passing through and taxing them. So when Irving called New York Gotham, he wasn't paying it a compliment.
No, he was gently, or maybe not so gently, mocking the pretensions and the vanity of the city's residents.
Absolutely. And that satirical spirit set the stage for his first monumental literary success, A History of New York in 1809. But this was not a real history.
No, it was a sprawling, humorous satire aimed right at the dry, self-important local histories of the day, all framed within the persona of Diedrich Knickerbocker.
And the launch of this book is where Irving reveals himself as, a true genius of early public relations. He orchestrated a massive marketing hoax that just gripped the entire city.
You really can't overstate the brilliance of the Knickerbocker hoax.
No, you can't. Irving and his brother first placed a series of classified missing person ads in the New York Evening Post.
Looking for Diedrich Knickerbocker.
Exactly. Described as this crusty, elderly Dutch scholar who had vanished from his boarding house. They made him sound completely real, right down to his eccentric clothes.
So then they followed up?
A few days later, they published another notice, supposedly from the hotel proprietor, saying that if the old man didn't return to settle his bill, the proprietor would be forced to publish the lengthy, peculiar manuscript he'd left behind.
So the city is now tracking a missing person who's also a literary figure whose lost manuscript is about to be printed against his will. It's genius.
It's pure genius. And the public reaction was astounding. It wasn't just the public. The city officials were genuinely concerned enough to offer a reward for the safe return of this fictional historian.
That's amazing.
People were talking about Knickerbocker on every street corner. So when Irving finally published the history under the Knickerbocker name, the pre-publication buzz guaranteed it would be an instant success.
He had established himself, in one move, as a master of both satire and marketing. And the legacy of that name, Diedrich Knickerbocker, it's stuck.
It became a nickname for the city's residents, and of course it was later adopted by the New York Knicks.
It's just another example of him weaving fiction into the cultural fabric. But this high point of public success was happening during a period of profound personal tragedy for
It
him.
was. He wrote this first major work while mourning the death of his 17-year-old fiancée, Matilda Hoffman, who had died just 2 years earlier. He never married, and his inability to secure a stable income was tied to losing the one person he truly wanted to settle down with.
That adds such a layer of melancholy to his early, brilliant satire. He was navigating immense personal grief and professional uncertainty all at once.
Yeah. After the success of the history, Irving tried to find some stability. He took a role editing Analectic magazine, and during this period, he was really engaged with the narratives of the young republic.
He was writing biographies of naval heroes.
And significantly, he was among the first editors to reprint Francis Scott Key's poem, Defense of Fort McHenry, the work that would become the Star-Spangled Banner.
It's interesting, though, that his political stance on the War of 1812 was initially cautious. He was, after all, part of the merchant class.
Right, and they saw the conflict as economically devastating. But that perspective changed dramatically in 1814 after the British attacked Washington, D.C.
He enlisted.
He did. He served on the staff of New York Governor Daniel Tompkins. He saw minimal action, but his willingness to serve sort of confirmed his commitment to the American cause.
But the war had a disastrous consequence for his family's business.
It did. It crippled international trade, and the Irving family trading company suffered immensely. This is the financial crisis that really forced his hand. In mid-1815, Irving sailed for England with the grim mission of trying to salvage the collapsing firm.
He thought it would be a brief trip.
A brief trip that turned into 17 years. He spent 2 arduous years trying every maneuver he could think of. But the economic crisis was just too deep. By 1817, the firm was forced to declare bankruptcy.
So this was the true crossroads of his life. He's stranded abroad, he's penniless, and the family safety net is gone.
It's gone. So, facing total destitution, he made what must have been a terrifying career shift. He committed to writing full-time in 1817. This is the moment America gets its first professional author.
And this commitment was strengthened by a really key relationship.
Yes, in the summer of 1817, he visited Abbotsford and established this deep, lifelong friendship with Sir Walter Scott, who was arguably the most celebrated writer in the world at the time.
And that connection would later become his financial lifeline.
Absolutely. The pressure on him was immense. He was in England, staying with his sister Sarah, when the inspiration for his most famous story struck. He composed Rip Van Winkle almost overnight.
And the commitment he showed to this new life was total.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
In October 1818, his brother William secured him a guaranteed, stable, well-paying post as chief clerk to the U.S. Navy.
And he urged him to come home to financial security.
And Irving turned it down flat. He refused the stability his family had always wanted for him, choosing instead to stay in Europe and pursue the volatile, bankruptcy-fueled career of a writer.
That was an incredibly courageous gamble.
A huge gamble. But it paid off. In 1819, he sent a set of short pieces back to his brother Ebenezer in New York. The collection was titled The Sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon, Gent.
And it was serialized in 7 installments. Rip Van Winkle was in the first, and The Legend of Sleepy Hollow was in the 6th.
The reaction was immediate and phenomenal. The stories felt uniquely American in their setting, but they were polished enough to appeal to European sensibilities.
But that success immediately created a massive financial headache.
The problem of literary piracy.
Right. The lack of international copyright law meant that as soon as his work appeared in New York, British publishers could just reprint it without his permission and without paying him a dime.
So he had to execute this high-stakes, calculated defense. He paid out of his own pocket to publish the first 4 American installments as a single volume in London. His goal was purely defensive, to establish his claim.
But then his London publisher went bankrupt.
He did. Irving was briefly in a panic, and that's when the Sir Walter Scott connection saved him.
Scott intervened.
He did. He recommended Irving to the powerful London publisher John Murray, who agreed to take on the sketchbook. And this move was groundbreaking for American literature. Irving established the essential precedent of publishing concurrently in both the U.S. and Britain.
It was the only way to protect his copyright and his earnings.
It was. And this strategy, combined with the sheer popularity of the book, it transformed his status overnight. For the next 2 years, he was an international celebrity. He was celebrated in Paris and Great Britain as this cultural phenomenon. The sources call him an anomaly of literature, an upstart American who dared to write English well.
That's a great line.
It is. But that status created this pressure to keep producing. His follow-up in 1822 was Bracebridge Hall, using the same Geoffrey Crayon persona.
This time focusing more on English country life.
Right. And it was generally well received. It cemented his reputation with European readers.
But the first signs of a critical backlash started to appear.
They did. Some critics felt it was just a charming imitation of the sketchbook, that it lacked originality. And meanwhile, Irving was struggling internally. He was traveling in search of new material, battling severe writer's block and depression after the death of his brother William.
And there was more personal heartache.
Yes. While he was in Dresden, the 39-year-old Irving unsuccessfully proposed to an 18-year-old named Emily Foster. She refused him in 1823.
He returned to Paris depressed and creatively drained.
And in an effort to recover, he published Tales of a Traveler in 1824, which included the famous story, The Devil and Tom Walker. He was really optimistic about it.
But the critics were brutal.
They were. While the book sold respectably, the critical consensus was disappointment. The New York Mirror pronounced Irving overrated, suggesting his charm was wearing thin.
That must have been devastating for him.
It was. This critical setback deeply wounded him. He retreated entirely in Paris, spending the next year just scribbling down ideas that went nowhere, constantly worried about his volatile financial situation.
So that professional life he chose over the stability of the Navy was proving to be intensely challenging.
Absolutely. And that period of depression and financial strain in Paris led directly to the next unexpected chapter of his career, one that fundamentally reshaped his focus from fiction to history.
Right. In January 1826, the American minister to Spain, Alexander Hill Everett, reached out to him.
Everett had a very specific proposition. He urged Irving to join him in Madrid, noting that the Spanish archives were opening up, offering fascinating new manuscripts about the Spanish conquest of the Americas.
And Irving, desperate for new material and a change of scenery, jumped at the chance.
He moved to Madrid, got access to the American consul's extensive library, and just started scouring the Spanish archives. This wasn't just research. It was total immersion.
He was determined to apply his narrative skill to deep historical subjects.
And this exhaustive labor resulted in A History of the Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus, published in 1828.
Which was a massive popular success. It went through 175 editions before the end of the century.
And critically, it marked a professional evolution. It was the first project he published under his own name. He was signaling his transition from a satirical humorist to a serious man of letters.
He followed that up with more historical work.
Yeah, A Chronicle of the Conquest of Granada in 1829, and Voyages and Discoveries of the Companions of Columbus in 1831.
And his Spanish writings really defined this new genre of romantic history.
It did. The genre was revolutionary because it seamlessly blended deep archival research with highly imaginative, story-sharpening elements. He saw history as a narrative, and he was determined to make it compelling.
This is where we uncover one of his most profound and unintentionally damaging cultural fingerprints.
Yes. His Columbus biography is the undeniable source of the durable, persistent myth that medieval Europeans believed the Earth was flat.
And that Columbus was the revolutionary genius who proved it was round. So wait, if he was doing meticulous historical research, how did he create that myth?
It was a deliberate narrative choice, a bit of dramatic license. In his account of the Council of Salamanca, the scholars who advised the Spanish monarchs Irving amplified and fictionalized the opposition to Columbus's voyage.
He basically invented a conflict to make the story better.
Pretty much. He included this particularly antagonistic character who raises the flat Earth objection, not because it was a major point of contention at the time. It wasn't most educated people knew the world was round, but because it heightened the drama.
He needed Columbus to be a heroic visionary battling ignorance.
Exactly. And because the book was so popular, that fictional conflict was subsequently taught as historical fact to generations of Americans. It just shows the immense power of his pen in shaping national perception.
It really does. Meanwhile, he was finding inspiration in his actual surroundings. In 1829, he briefly lived inside the Alhambra Palace in Granada.
An amazing experience which resulted in his atmospheric travelogue, Tales of the Alhambra, published in 1832.
His success as a literary figure in Spain quickly translated into diplomatic service. In 1829, he was appointed secretary to the American legation in London.
This was a serious post. He worked closely with Minister Louis Maclean, and together they negotiated a crucial trade agreement between the U.S. and the British West Indies.
So he was no longer just a struggling writer, he was a high-level government functionary.
And the accolades poured in. He received a medal from the Royal Society of Literature and an honorary doctorate of civil law from Oxford in 1831.
And when Minister Maclean was recalled, Irving stepped up as the top diplomat.
He did, as chargé d'affaires. And he showed his political acumen then. When the Senate, in a partisan move, refused to confirm Martin Van Buren as the new minister, Irving was there to console him.
And he made a brilliant prediction.
He told Van Buren that this vote would probably go far toward elevating him to the presidential chair. And he was right. The public backlash helped Van Buren win the presidency in 1836.
So, after a brief return home, his expertise in Spanish affairs made him the natural choice for a high political post. In 1842, President John Tyler appointed him U.S. Minister to Spain.
Irving hoped this posting would be relatively quiet, offering him financial stability and time to write.
But the reality was anything but comfortable. His tenure from 1842 to 1846 was dominated by intense political upheaval. Spain was in chaos.
Complete chaos. Warring factions were constantly vying for control of the young Queen Isabella II, who was only 12 when he arrived.
He was exhausted by the relentless politicking.
Oh, absolutely. He confessed in his letters, "I am wearied and at times heartsick of the wretched politics of this country."
And he wrote a really devastating passage about how it had changed him.
Yeah, he said, "The last 10 or 12 years of my life has shown me so much of the dark side of human nature that I begin to have painful doubts of my fellow man."
Wow. It reveals the cost of turning the romantic writer into a jaded political operative.
It does. His duties were immense. He was monitoring trade with Cuba, debates over the slave trade, and even helping negotiate the Oregon border dispute with Britain. He was a high-level troubleshooter, a world away from Geoffrey Crayon.
Irving finally returned to New York in September 1832, after 17 years abroad. He was a celebrity, but he was also culturally disconnected.
Right. He knew he needed to prove his American credentials again.
So he immediately addressed the criticism that he'd become too European by embarking on a tour of the American frontier. He went with the Commissioner on Indian Affairs deep into what's now Oklahoma.
This trip provided the material for A Tour on the Prairies, published in 1835. And this was a crucial book, his first written and published in the U.S. since 1809.
This shift to Western subjects was a very calculated move.
It was. He followed it with two other Western books, Astoria and The Adventures of Captain Bonneville.
And these were a direct response to critics like James Fenimore Cooper, who argued that his time in Europe had made him more European than American.
Exactly. He was determined to show he was still rooted in American subject matter. And it was a successful strategy at home, but the old tension remained. British critics often dismissed these later works as just bookmaking.
The economic imperative was now inseparable from the artistic one. Which brings us to his home, Sunnyside.
Yes, in 1835 he purchased a neglected cottage in Tarrytown, which he continually renovated and named Sunnyside in 1841. This home was his retreat and his identity.
But the costs kept escalating, demanding more income.
Which is why he reluctantly agreed to become a regular paid contributor to the Knickerbocker magazine starting in 1839. He had to resurrect his old pseudonyms just to generate cash flow.
The fact that the first great American author had to constantly hustle says so much about the economic realities of the profession.
It really does. But he also became a huge advocate for other writers. He corresponded with figures like Edgar Allan Poe and championed stronger U.S. copyright laws.
And he secured a massive financial victory for himself, setting a new standard for author compensation.
Yes, that deal with the publisher George Palmer Putnam for his author's revised edition guaranteed him 12% of the retail price of all copies sold. That was revolutionary for an author in that era.
As he was managing his old works, he returned to serious biography.
He did, publishing lives of Oliver Goldsmith and, remarkably, the Islamic prophet Muhammad. It just shows the breadth of his scholarly interests.
But the true capstone of his life was the subject closest to his heart. He completed his 5-volume biography of his namesake, The Life of George Washington.
He finished it between 1855 and 1859. He had been blessed by the man at age 6, and he dedicated his last years to honoring the first president.
He died of a heart attack at Sunnyside on November 28, 1859, at age 76, just 8 months after completing the final volume.
He's buried in Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, where he was memorialized by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow in a powerful poem that spoke of Irving leaving a grief and gladness in the atmosphere.
Moving beyond the literature and diplomacy, the most astonishing part of this is realizing how many core details of American culture trace directly back to Washington Irving's creative decisions.
The impact is everywhere. Let's just start with language. Irving is credited with inventing the expression, the almighty dollar.
Which is perfect, coming from the author who constantly struggled to earn enough money from his writing.
The irony is just perfect. And then there's Christmas. If you picture a cozy, traditional, idealized English Christmas roaring fires, caroling Irving is largely responsible for importing and popularizing that exact vision in the United States.
He is the architect of the modern American secular Christmas.
Absolutely. His 5 Christmas stories in the sketchbook presented this idealized, traditional English Christmas. And this was a direct contrast to how the holiday was celebrated in post-revolutionary America.
How is it different had it been abandoned?
In many places, yeah. Following the Puritan tradition, Christmas celebrations had been subdued or even banned in large parts of the Northeast. Even after the bans were lifted, the holiday was often chaotic, marked by rowdy, drunken public gatherings.
So Irving's vision was domestic, family-centered, and nostalgic.
Exactly. He created a blueprint for a genteel, non-controversial holiday focused on goodwill and cozy interiors. And that blueprint was adopted wholesale.
Without Irving's 5 stories, the American perception of the holiday would look fundamentally different.
It would. And his fictional geography is now real geography. There are towns named after him, like Irving, Texas.
And in the ultimate homage, the village of North Tarrytown officially changed its name to Sleepy Hollow in 1996.
Purely to honor him and capitalize on the story's popularity. His narratives created the first widely recognized American folklore that was rich enough to inspire generations of American artists.
So looking back at this enormous body of work, he's overwhelmingly credited as the first American man of letters.
And maybe more importantly, the first American writer to earn his living solely by his pen. He professionalized the entire writing career in the United States.
And his contemporaries recognized that. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow said he was the first to win for our country an honorable name and position in the history of letters. He put American writing on the international map.
He also perfected the American short story. Before Irving, a lot of American writing was didactic, focused on morals. Irving broke that mold. He wrote primarily to entertain.
But this is where we need to slow down and consider the friction. Because while everyone respected him as the pioneer, not everyone agreed on the actual quality of the writing.
And that's the crux of the literary debate. The skeptic-in-chief was Edgar Allan Poe.
Right.
In 1838, Poe wrote a critique arguing that Irving was much overrated. Poe valued technical precision and psychological depth above all else.
So he was arguing that we should separate the credit due to the pioneer solely from the credit due to the actual writing.
Exactly. He was implying the writing itself was light, that it lacked sophistication or profundity. It was a critique of substance versus style.
And he also faced criticism that he was just an American author writing for English tastes.
Yeah, critics like John Neal dismissed him as a poor copy of the English writer Oliver Goldsmith, claiming he wrote of and for England rather than his own country.
That must have stung, especially after he tried so hard to prove his American bona fides. So how did his defenders frame his work?
They reframed his style as a strength. William Makepeace Thackeray, the famous English novelist, was the first to call Irving the ambassador whom the new world of letters sent to the old.
He was the bridge.
He was the bridge. They argued that his ability to blend European polish with American subject matter was precisely his value. He wasn't just imitating, he was fusing.
In later generations, though, the critiques often came back to the idea that he lacked a grand theme.
The famous line was, "The man had no message." He was viewed as a charming entertainer who was maybe just fortunate in his timing.
But that view has changed, hasn't it?
Oh, significantly. More recent scholarship has seen a major resurgence in his reputation, particularly as a historian. Scholars now deeply respect his biographies, Columbus Astoria, The Life of George Washington, for their reliability and literary skill.
So we now appreciate that he established the groundwork for blending rigorous research with compelling narrative.
Exactly. He gave America its history not just in facts, but in stories.
So what does this all mean? Washington Irving's career, from satirical pseudonyms to solemn diplomacy, it just shows the intense friction in establishing a national literature.
It really does.
He spent his life struggling between defining an authentic American voice while also trying to appeal to international acclaim. And he constantly navigated that tension between being a pioneer and being judged by those who came after him.
Irving's life perfectly exemplifies the complexity of managing a public intellectual career while navigating massive personal and financial upheaval. He was constantly creating history and myth, all while just trying to keep his head above water financially.
It all came back to money.
Right. His career was defined by the relentless economic realities of writing. The bankruptcy, the copyright battles, the need for diplomatic posts to fund his home and his writing, which raises an important question for you, the learner, to consider. Considering Irving was constantly driven by financial necessity to write across all possible genres, and he actually helped invent the expression, the almighty dollar, how might he have viewed the modern necessity for authors and creators to monetize their work across multiple platforms, stories, histories, travelogues, biographies, film rights, digital content, simply to afford their home?
Wow. Was the pioneer of American letters simply the pioneer of the American content creator, bound forever to the necessity of the almighty dollar?